You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And welcome to another episode of Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And today we're going to be talking about the January 2018 Books and Boba book club pick, Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. And whew, Rira, you really picked a doozy to start off this year, man.
I know. 500-page book. Well, a little bit less than 500 pages.
Yeah.
It's the longest one that we've read for a book club.
Needless to say, it is we're going to have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah.
And yeah, but before we get to our book club discussion, we're going to go through really quickly some recent new releases and news to get you caught up in the world of Asian American literature. So let's just get through it because I need to talk about Pachinko.
First up is I Am Thunder by Muhammad Khan, released on January 25th, published by Macmillan Children's Books. Musna Salim, a 15-year-old Muslim girl who dreams of being a writer, struggles with controlling parents who only care about her studying to be a doctor. When her best friend is shamed in a scandal, Musna is forced to move to a new school in South London. While her new school has its fair share of bullies and prejudice, she catches the eye of Arif, the hottest boy in school. But Arif has secrets, and his brother Jamil starts to influence Musna with his views of the world. Now Musna must face an impossible choice: keep quiet and betray her beliefs, or speak out and betray her heart.
Ooh.
It is a book about extremist Islamophobia, bullying. I've heard great things about this book. So definitely go read it.
Yeah. Next up, American Panda by Gloria Chow. Releases on February 6th, published by Simon Pulse. May, a 17-year-old freshman at MIT, has followed her parents' plans so far. Now all she has to do is become a doctor, marry a nice Taiwanese Ivy Leaguer, and have lots of babies. With everything her parents have sacrificed to make her cushy life a reality, May can't bring herself to tell her parents the truth, that she's a germaphobe and shudders at the thought of medical school, and that she has a crush on a Japanese-American classmate. But when she reconnects with her brother Xing, who is estranged from the family for dating the wrong woman, May starts to wonder if all the secrets are truly worth it.
I want this book. I want it.
It seems very relatable.
I've wanted a college book for a really long time, like an Asian American in college, because we normally get like middle schoolers, high schoolers, and it's really nice that we're getting more like college and also post-college books now.
Yeah.
Next up is Checked by Cynthia Kadohata, releases on February 6th, published by Anthenium Caitlin Doley Books. Hockey is Connor's life. There are very few things Connor and his dad love more than the game, and one of those things is their Doberman, Sinbad. When Sinbad is diagnosed with cancer, Connor chooses to cut back on ice time to pay for his dog's chemotherapy. But without hockey to distract him, Connor begins to notice more, like his dad's crying bouts and his friend's difficult family life. And then Connor notices one more thing. Without hockey, the one thing that makes him feel special, is he really special at all?
Mm-hmm.
It's a middle grade novel, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. It sounds like a good message for the kiddos out there. And last up is Shadow Song by S.J. Jones, releases on February 6th, published by Wednesday Books. 6 months after the end of Winter Song, Liesl is working toward furthering both her brothers and her own musical careers. But life in the world isn't as easy as Liesl had hoped. Her younger brother, Joseph, is cold and withdrawn, while Liesl can't forget the austere young man she left beneath the earth. When troubling signs arise that the barrier between worlds is crumbling, Liesl must return to the underground to unravel the mystery of life, death, and the Goblin King. Who he was, who he is, and who he will be.
If I'm correct, the first book, Winter Song, was inspired by Labyrinth, the movie.
That would make sense.
Yes.
There is a Goblin King in that movie as well.
Yes.
And those are your upcoming new releases in Asian American literature. Really quickly, let's go through some of the latest news headlines.
Okay, first up on our news is Delacorte Press bought debut author Amelie Wen Zhao's YA fantasy trilogy, Blood Heir. The epic follows a fugitive princess with a dark secret and a charismatic con man who forge an unlikely alliance in order to save themselves, each other, and their kingdom. The first book is slated for summer 2019. Yeah, I saw the pitch for this on Twitter. I think it was during DV Pit, and I'm really glad that it got picked up.
Awesome. Next up, Little Brown acquired Samir Ahmed's YA novel Internment. Set in the near future, Muslim Americans are forced into an internment camp, and 17-year-old Layla Ahmed must find the courage to fight back against Islamophobia, oppression, and complicit silence. Publication is set for spring 2019.
Yo, I am so glad that there's an own voices version of American Heart, because that's totally what this is. I am so happy. I hope it does really, really well. And it's Samira Ahmed, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be amazing. And our last piece of news is not really related to Asian American literature, but I think it's important to mention this. Ursula K. Le Guin passed away on January 22nd at the age of 88. Ursula Le Guin, she is a very prolific sci-fi and fantasy novelist. She was also a really big advocate for feminism and just equal rights in publishing.
Yeah, I saw that her passing kind of took over literary Twitter for a while.
Her series, the Earthsea series, that was pretty much Harry Potter before Harry Potter, because it's about a boy who ends up going to wizard school. So see the similarity there. But it's interesting for that series because if I'm not mistaken, the protagonist is a dark-skinned character.
Okay.
So that was
very progressive.
That's very progressive. That time, yeah. And also her other famous book, The Left Hand of Darkness, it takes place on a planet where everyone is ambisexual. There's no actual gender. So that was also very interesting, and that was published in the late 60s, early 70s. So also very, very progressive.
If you're going to go sci-fi fantasy, why not just try to create the world you want to see?
Yeah.
Speaking of dark-skinned wizards, have you seen these illustrations of Zensho's Sorcerer of the Crown?
Yeah, I've been liking them left and right.
I think that's how they popped up on my feed.
I'm so excited for the sequel because it's coming out this year, but I don't know when.
Awesome. We should get Zen on the pod to talk about it.
Call us
sometime. Yeah.
DM, slide into our DMs.
But those are the new releases and top news of the recent Asian American literature world, I guess. On that note, I guess it's time to talk about our January book club pick. As always, you can also contribute to our conversation by posting on our Goodreads forums. Just go to goodreads.com and join the Books and Boba Goodreads group. We had quite a few people post about their thoughts about the book. A couple questions here and there that we're going to bring up during the pod. But overall, it looks like people really enjoyed reading this. And you can add me and Rira to the list as well. It's a really important read, I feel like.
Yes, definitely.
But before we get to the discussion, just a quick warning. We will be spoiling the book. So if you do plan on reading this book, I recommend you don't listen to us talk about it until you read it. Because
or don't really care about spoilers.
Yeah.
If you get mad that we spoil the book for you, then that's on you.
I feel like there's not much to... Oh, there's a couple big spoilers, but I feel like even knowing certain things, it's still a good book to read, just to immerse yourself in this story, right?
Yeah.
As always, we're going to start by reading what do you call this? The jacket intro.
The jacket description
of the book. So this is Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. It is a National Book Award finalist and one of the best novels of 2017, according to a lot of people. In the early 1900s, teenage Sunja, the adored daughter of a crippled fisherman, falls for a wealthy stranger at the seashore near her home in Korea. He promises her the world, but when she discovers she is pregnant and that her lover is married, she refuses to be bought. Instead, she accepts an offer of marriage from a gentle, sickly minister passing through on his way to Japan. But her decision to abandon her home and to reject her son's powerful father sets off a dramatic saga that will echo through the generations. So based on that, you kind of think, oh, maybe it's like, maybe it's like Korean Notebook or something.
Korean Notebook? What?
It's way more than that.
Okay, so I guess when I first heard about this book, I thought it was going to be more of like it is definitely a historical fiction novel, but I thought it would touch more on like political stuff and just like more like more events that happen in the war. But it's actually very like centered on like this one family's struggles and journey, and not much of like political happenings. I mean, it happens in the background, but it's not really like centered to the book. And I actually really like that. I was telling Marvin before we started recording this, I come from a very biased position when it comes to reading this.
Well, you are Korean.
I am not only of Korean descent, but both sides of my family, they were independence activists, and I have great grandparents and aunts and uncles who have fought and died during the independence movement, and
this was during colonial.
This was during
times.
the colonial times, and also my grandfather, he went to Waseda for law, but then he had to drop out because he had to take care of his family back on the farm. And my parents always drill this into me. They always say like, your grandfather was amazing. Do you know how much discrimination he had to face when he went to Waseda? Like, they hate Koreans over there. And I kind of grew up like listening to all that stuff. So
another thing Reba told me before, because I've seen this book on Reba's bookshelf for most of the life of this podcast. And I always I've asked a couple times, is it time to read Pachinko? And she would always go, not yet. Not yet. I'm not ready.
I'm not ready. Yeah.
But here
like
we
I
are.
said, yeah, like I said, I come from a very, very biased position, and it's like it was pretty difficult for me to get through some parts of this book because there were like references here and there, like the March 1st movement, and just like how like Koreans were imprisoned in Japanese prisons, and then they were let go right before they died.
Yeah.
And it's stories that I have heard from my family, and there's actually like the hometown that my dad is from in Korea, there's actually a museum there. It's the Korean Independence Museum. So, I grew up knowing a lot of the stuff that, the Japanese did to the Koreans. I actually know more about the colonial era than the actual Korean War.
Really?
No one talks about it in my family. Both of my grandparents, they fought in the Korean War, and no one talks about it. So I actually don't know anything about it. And also like by extension, I knew kind of, like basic information about, Zainichi. I don't really want to call Korean Japanese Zainichi because that word means like temporarily staying in Japan.
Right.
And I don't think that is a apt description for people who have been living there for 3-4 generations.
It's interesting. Yeah. So, because the way that I internalized what I was reading was kind of transferring what I know about American culture and like the xenophobia I see in America, translating that from the xenophobia I read in the book.
Yeah.
So, because my background is, of course, I'm Chinese by way of Taiwan, meaning that my parents, my family came to Taiwan before the Civil War, and then basically just couldn't go home because the communists had taken over. And like, there's a lot of crap that goes with that as well. But in terms of, learning about the ethnic Koreans in Japan, this was my first exposure to it through this story.
Yeah, like I thought it was very interesting because like in America, Korean Americans and and also like Asian Americans in general, we're kind of upheld as like the model minority and saying like, oh, they work so hard. Why can't why can't other minorities be like that? And we're like a wedge. But in Japan, though, where Koreans are kind of seen as inferior, crude, and up to no good, part of the Yakuza, criminal activities, all that stuff. I mean, it's changed now because we're a couple of generations removed from the colonial period, but there is still a lot of discrimination. It's just kind of moved into the internet and also in very subtle ways. I think we'll get more into that later in the discussion because there is a lot to talk about before then.
So how do you want to start? Where do we start from? Do we start from the beginning or?
I guess we can start with the first arc of the book, which takes place in the 1910s to the 1930s. So during the colonial era. And that's when we're introduced to Sunja, who is the kind of like the anchor to this book.
Yeah, she's the only character that exists all throughout the entire, from the beginning, from the first chapter to the last chapter.
Yeah, I really liked how the book opened up. The opening line was, "History has failed us, but no matter." And I said earlier that I was surprised that this book didn't really touch on on a lot of like political and just like wartime stories.
I mean, it doesn't touch on that, but everything it like,
affects them.
Yeah, like everything that this family goes through is because of politics that doesn't concern them personally, but affects them all the same.
Yeah, and it's more about survival because you know, like the Yangban, the aristocrats don't care for the poor, and like you're also like under Japanese rule, and neither of those parties are really taking care of Sunja's family. So it's all about survival and what you can do to make sure that your family can eat and have a roof over their head.
It's interesting. So I like the first chapter explaining, like, within poor families, like, even getting married wasn't a guarantee, right? People were like, it kind of establishes a lot of like the values of Korean culture and kind of all the superstitions and all the
I wouldn't say it was really superstitions. I think it was just economy. Like,
I mean, the values, right? Like, because Sunja's father had a cleft lip, he was not desirable.
Yeah.
But then because there weren't enough men for daughters to marry,
it was more like not a lot of men were able to marry because they didn't have the dowry, like the bride gift price, and they were unable to provide homes for women.
Yeah.
And I mean, Korean culture is so entrenched in patriarchy, and it's something that I still get very angry about. And it's very infuriating because like Korean culture is so built on like the Confucian hierarchy, and that didn't exist like in ancient Korea. That's
our bad.
That came later. Yeah. Like before then, women were allowed to own property. They were allowed to have jobs on their own. So it's just like it's something that makes me really mad.
That's from when the Chinese Empire took over.
Yeah, fuck you guys. No.
But no, I mean, in terms of like, because of the cleft lip, because of the deformities of her father, like the family was seen as like, oh, there's like some sort of cursed blood or something. And that's something that's another thing that goes throughout, just like this idea of you being hereditarily cursed.
Yeah. And then there was like in the beginning chapters, there was always like this worry that like the child might inherit the father's like cleft lip and like his bad leg. And, but at the same time, it was just like, it's like, well, like, what can you do? Like, we just have to move forward.
So the first part ends with them having a daughter instead of a son who's quote unquote perfect, right? In terms of like no deformities, no health problems, and survives through childhood, which back then you don't realize this, but like as early as the last century, like it wasn't guaranteed that your kids would survive for the first year or two.
That's why we have the celebration, the birthday celebration. Like, what is it? Like the 100th day.
Yeah.
Like we call it tor, and Marvin pronounces it doll.
It's no, I do have to annoy my Korean friends, but yeah, that's the first birthday where you're supposed to like choose your destiny, right?
Yeah, it's just like, yay, this baby did not die, and it might survive past its like second year.
Yeah, it's interesting though because throughout the story, they only portray one doll.
Yeah.
Right, but that's later on. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very Korean thing. I don't think Japan does anything similar.
Yeah,
I know they have a celebration for like 3-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 9-year-olds, but I don't think they do like the 100th day celebration.
I'm not sure about the Japanese. I know Chinese people, we do the 100-day celebration.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the fisherman Huni and his wife Yunjin have a daughter named Sunja, and Huni owns a boarding house, right? That's the family business.
It's established early on that a woman's worth is based on how well she marries and like how and her chastity.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into like kind of the first like the inciting incident pretty much of this book, which is Sunja meets this suave Korean Japanese guy.
Fishmonger, right?
Yeah.
He's like a fish seller or buyer.
She meets Ko Han-soo and he's like she genuinely thinks that he loves her and
well, he saves her from Japanese bullies.
Yes.
Who are trying to rape her.
Yes. And she finds out first spoiler, she finds out that he has a wife back in Osaka, and
after getting pregnant.
After she got pregnant, and he's just like, "Oh, you can be like my mistress. I'll take care of you and like our child."
He said, "My Korean wife, like my wife in Korea." And
my wife in Korea.
This is your first like Ko Han-soo sticks around for the entire story. Like he's not like just like, oh, he's just a baby daddy. He's not in the picture. He sticks around. He's a huge driving force in the story Pachinko, and this is your first your first intro into how he views the world.
Yeah.
Right. How he bucks tradition. He doesn't care about tradition. Like everything is something that can be fixed.
Yeah.
Or
everything is something that can be bought with money and power. But yeah, like with Sunja, it was kind of like, I don't want to be your mistress because that means whatever child I have won't have a surname, and therefore they won't have like any rights in this country. And it's true, like orphans and like children born out of wedlock, they had no future. So it was kind of something that I don't want to just say like, oh, it's kind of like a curse, but
yeah. I mean, again, the whole idea of like passing down a tainted legacy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Tainted legacies come up a lot in this book. But I just want to like power through this first arc. She meets a missionary, Ishak, who
a minister.
Ishak, who is from like a very rich family back up north
in Pyongyang. Yeah.
Yeah, and he comes down because he is on his way to go see his brother in Osaka.
Yeah.
To be a minister in one of the congregations there.
And he's also very sickly. Like he's had tuberculosis multiple times. Yeah.
And he offers to be her husband because he always thought that like he would never have children because he's too sick.
Also, he feels like he owes them a debt because they nursed him through his second bout with tuberculosis when he was staying with them. And he's just the type of person who like, he's very like altruistic and very, some people might say naive, but very like, all this is to set up the fact that they move to Osaka in Japan and become like become
Korean
immigrants in
in Japan.
Yeah.
And that's where we get like first generation immigrant story, which is this is still set in colonial times. The war hasn't started, and Koreans are treated.
I mean, the war's been going on.
The war's been going on, but like,
I mean, Korea didn't colonize itself.
No. But they, like, once they arrive in Osaka, you realize how badly Koreans are treated there.
Yeah.
Like, Sunja, who doesn't have any Western clothes, she's still dressed in hanbok. Like, she gets, like stares when she's getting off the train. And, she realizes that, I mean, it's like a first glimpse at like the difference between Japan and Korea when it comes to technology, when it comes to modernization.
I mean, they essentially live in a ghetto, right? They live in Kaino, which is like the Korean ghetto in Osaka. And very quickly you see the tropes of, this is where I kind of started seeing the tropes of like the Asian American immigrant story where, especially what we read in The Sympathizer, where you had these people with like prominent positions or nobility or whatever, and they become an immigrant, and all of a sudden everything changes. Now they have to work. Now they're like the bottom rung society. They no longer enjoy like, Isak's family is a rich family from Pyongyang, and in Japan they're like the poorest of the poor.
Yeah, like
right.
You quickly realize that Koreans they can't get any housing because Japanese people won't rent out to Koreans. You realize that they can't really get any jobs outside of like blue collar work, and even then you're lucky because a lot of the times they'll
say there's like, why should I keep you or give you a raise when there's 10 people who would do your job for
10
cheaper,
people will
right?
like people are so desperate,
like the perils of industrialization,
Yeah.
becoming industrialized nation. And I don't know, what did you think about the scene where when Isaac first arrives and his brother Yosep is basically telling him, you can't be nice here, stop being like, you have to like toughen up to survive here.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I was like, don't lend money, don't let people know how rich you are. Like, I found it really interesting that like Yosep owns his house.
Yeah.
But he makes an effort to make it look like he doesn't. And like the outside of the house is plain and dirty, but the inside is nice.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just like a matter of survival, right? Like people will do anything to feed their kids. And it's like, well, if you let people know that you have more than them, then they will take it.
You can't count on people saying, "Oh, we're all in this together." It's like the immigrant struggle, where like it's the conflict between self-preservation and collective support.
Yeah.
Right. Like we should all be in this together, but when push comes to shove and survival's on the table, everyone's going to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
That's the situation they find themselves in as we go into the next generation, which is part 2 of the book, where Sunja gives birth to Noah, who is the son of Kohansu, but then also gives birth to another son with Noah named Moses. And part 2 starts with Isaac being arrested.
Arrested because if you read this book, then you probably know already, but Christianity in Japan was seen as being a traitorous act towards the emperor.
Yeah, because the emperor is the head of the
head of religion. Yeah. So a lot of Christian missionaries and ministers were arrested back then, and
so I guess what happened was Isaac's church, not the head minister, but the
I don't know what to call him. I'll just call him the deputy minister. He's of Chinese descent.
Manchurian.
Yeah. And when they're supposed to go to the shrine and like kind of pray for the emperor, they find out that he is saying the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
And instead of like taking it back, he says,
he doubles down.
Yeah. He's like, I'd rather die, believing in my faith rather than like pretending to worship another god. It's idolatry and all that stuff. And the thing is, like, Ishak, he's not really involved. He just happened to be there at the wrong time and place because he's not the one who said the Lord's Prayer.
He's not, but because he's such a good dude, you know?
I don't think it was anything to do with him being a good dude. He was just there. He was standing next to the Manchurian minister, and you know, the Japanese back then didn't need a reason, you know?
Yeah.
And the entire time when like Sunja and like Yosef and Kyungi, they plead with the clerk at the police station saying like, he didn't do anything wrong. Like you have to let us speak to him. And they were like, no, if he's innocent, then like he'll get off. No problem.
Yeah.
But that turns out not to be true. He stays in prison for over a year.
No, like over 6 years.
Over 6 years, right?
Yeah. A long time. And it's like the helplessness of like people who have like, not even that they don't have rights. They're not even seen as basic humans in the eyes of the law. And you feel that frustration that and the unfairness that.
I mean, you see that like this is a rigged system.
Yeah.
Like the Japanese police say like, oh, there's like nothing we can do, but it's like, no, there is something you can do. You can let him go, let him have a free trial, but they don't.
Yeah.
So inherently, like the reason why like Yosef was telling his brother, don't make trouble, don't ever contact the police, don't do this, don't do that. It's warranted because the police aren't going to take the Korean side. And this is something that we see in America as well. Like, a lot of minorities are targeted by the police.
Yeah,
and
people assume the worst about your group based on stereotypes and based on.
But a lot of the times those stereotypes are created because the system doesn't allow them to have jobs. It doesn't allow them to have the things that they need in order to survive. So how else are they going to make a living? They're going to turn to criminal activities and all that. And it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And this isn't just like Koreans in Japan. It's like any marginalized group in a country where like the dominant group has power and don't see them as humans.
Yeah.
We've seen this with we've seen this with the Jews in Europe. We've seen this with Black people in America today and also Muslims in America today. So inherently, I think Pachinko is very relatable because it's really funny that it is that relatable because this takes place in like the 1900s and it's 2018 now.
I mean, it makes you just realize that people are crappy everywhere. And all you need is a reason to differentiate someone and blame them for problems. And you get the same results.
It's interesting that you said people are crappy everywhere because that is pretty much a quote that one of the characters say. I think it's Solomon who, and we'll get to Solomon a bit later, but he does mention there are good Koreans, bad Koreans, good Japanese, bad Japanese.
Yeah.
It does not matter. You will always find bad people in wherever you go. And that's not really the mentality that his grandparents and his parents had growing up. So you see, like, throughout this book, you see, like, how, like, mindset and acceptance and tolerance, it changes.
Generationally, too. And maybe it comes down to, like, what your priorities are, right? Like, Sunja's, like, her generation, it's all about keeping your head down, keeping low profile, and just making sure your next generation has the best opportunities possible. Yeah. And then the next generation, and I guess we can go into, so this is kind of where the narrative shifts from Sunja's generation to Noah and Musasu, who are her sons.
And they're pretty much polar opposites when it comes to what it means to be Korean.
Yeah.
They both face discrimination in their school place. They get bullied. They're told that their food smells and told to go back to their country. The classics, you know?
Yeah. And they're pretty much like textbook subjects for what is quote unquote, and then they make this distinction in the book, a good Korean and a bad Korean, right?
Yeah.
The good Korean studies hard, works hard, and tries to
stays calm, never never
does well in school,
Yeah.
doesn't stick out.
Well, this is a stereotype that like still exists today.
I mean, it's the modern minority stereotype in America, right?
Yeah, it is.
that
But
we
like,
face.
I was gonna say like, oh, Koreans are still seen by the Japanese as like very, in a positive way, passionate. In a negative way,
Angry.
and I have to say there is some truth to that. But yeah, like for Noah, he always tried to stay calm, always speak respectfully, and did his best to be like a model student. Whereas Mozasu,
is very fiery. He would fight anyone who like. He wouldn't fight people just to fight, but if anyone got like in his face or threatened people that he cared about, he wouldn't hesitate to throw down.
yeah.
And
For him, it was just like there is no good or bad Korean because everyone is treated terribly.
well, even as growing up as a school age kid, like he knew that like if people thought his brother was a good Korean, then they definitely thought him as the bad Korean.
Yeah.
And at some point, he just decided to like screw it. I'm just gonna. Like, and so there's this scene in while they're hiding on the farm during World War II when Osaka's being bombed, where the two boys are talking about what they want to be, right?
Yeah.
And Noah says, "I want to be a educated man like father was."
Yeah.
He still like
He still
about
believes that
his-
Isak was his
yeah,
birth
his-
father.
And then Mozasu says, "Well, I don't like reading. I want to be rich, but I want to be rich because I don't want so that auntie and mom don't have to work anymore."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I do want to mention Sunja and Kyungi working because for the longest time, they were not allowed to work.
Yeah.
Isak, even though he made pretty much nothing working as a minister, like,
And Yosef too.
and
kinda,
Yosef,
yeah.
like, you know, he had to like get a loan from loan sharks, and pretty much Sunja had to like take care of it by selling her belongings, you know?
He's your typical like. So Yosef is like he's a good dude. I feel like he's at his heart is a good person, but he's very much like that like patriarch. Like women are supposed to be in the kitchen. Women aren't supposed to work. The man's supposed to provide for his family.
See, like,
right?
the thing is, like, that is such like an aristocratic way of looking at things, because like poor classes, like people in like poor rungs of society, they were like, you have to work,
Yeah.
like in order to survive. So there's a lot of like,
Well, and that was the loophole that they found was well, Sunja can go work in the market. Kyung-hee can help her prepare.
yeah,
But as long as Kyung-hee's not in the market, it's okay based on like this value structure that Yosef has in his head.
and it's like it's so weird because they're not living in Korea anymore. The Yangbon class is like pretty much gone at this point because like the Japanese are taking away land from landowners in Korea, and it's just like those values have no ground in Japan. They're like, but like it still exists because they have like,
They want to hold on to like it's the whole like one of the themes in this story is identity and heritage and what do you hold on to as you become absorbed into like what does nationality, culture, heritage, traditions mean?
yeah. And what does that mean
Yeah.
depending on your gender, your economic status, and just like there's like all these tiers, you know?
Your environment, your geography, even nature versus nurture. Like
Yeah.
Noah grew up to be very much like temperament wise, like his adoptive father, even though his actual father probably has more in common with Moses. But yeah, they're able to work, and this is where Hansu comes back in the picture, where you see he kind of pulled the strings to make sure that they had jobs and they were able to support themselves because of providing for his son.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is another glimpse at patriarchy here. It's just like he has 3 daughters and he considers them worthless. And he's like, oh, a son that's not really like a son that was born out of wedlock is better than teaching my daughters to take over the business. But
Well, he also mentions that his daughters don't care.
don't care
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
But yeah, so the story shifts to Noah and Mosasu becoming young adults, right? And Noah gets into Waseda.
But they don't have the money.
Yeah.
So Hanzu steps in.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because you continually see the differences between Noah and Mosasu. Mosasu doesn't even graduate from high school.
Yeah.
He decides to work at a Pachinko parlor, and you know very early on that is like one of the only jobs that Korean Japanese people can get, because Pachinko is kind of seen as a dirty business.
It's gambling.
It's
so
gambling.
Automatically, it draws connotations of criminals and criminality.
I mean, we say it's gambling, but it's not really gambling because it's rigged. They fiddle with the machines beforehand. So there is like an allotted number of losers and winners.
I don't want to break it, but that's what gambling is.
No, it's not. There's still a chance to win with gambling.
There's also a chance to win in Pachinko.
I guess, but like the outcome is so fixed.
You just have to believe you're one of the lucky ones.
I don't know. Say that with poker. But with like Noah, like he goes to Waseda and he meets his first girlfriend and
Akiko.
Yeah. And wow.
So what did you think about her? She's like kind of your firebrand, like
I would call her
with daddy issues, I guess. I don't know, like parent issues.
Yeah, like I mean daddy issues, but also it's just kind of like, look, I'm dating. Like this is the equivalent of like, hey, you're my black friend.
Yeah, like performative like,
it's
wokeness,
like,
right?
Yeah, it's like false ally, and she tells him like, oh, I like the fact that you're Korean. Like, I'm liberal. I'm different from my conservative parents. It makes me superior. And that's when Noah realizes that she's never seen him as just like her boyfriend or even like just a human being. She's only seen him as like as a Korean and a way to like elevate her status and her image as like this very progressive person.
Yeah. And she kind of like F's with them because at the end, she's the one that tells them like, he's your father, right? Like Kohansu, because she like barges into one of their meetings.
Yeah.
And sends him down like what will be his like spiral.
Yeah.
Right.
And I do want to talk about that spiral because with Noah, like he has believed his entire life that if he does everything correctly, if he doesn't speak out and keep his head down, he will be rewarded.
But thinking about it, not only him thinking that's what he's been told his entire life from his mother, his father, his biological father, his uncle. Like he is basically your immigrant dream son, right? Like good at school, good at sports, good at everything. And he's gonna there's so much pressure on him, and this is like something that doesn't go away even with him going down a spiral and cutting all ties.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, like when he finds out, he confronts his mother, Sunja, and Sunja like is desperate and tells him like, I love you as if you were Isaac's son. Like blood doesn't matter. He was your father. And Noah pretty much says, no, blood does matter because I'm dirty, because I have Yakuza blood in me, and everything that you have told me is a lie. And I think the way he, this is kind of jumping ahead, but he pretty much tries to restart his life. And he moves to Yokohama. Nagano. Sorry, not Yokohama.
Moses moves to
Yokohama.
Yeah.
So he moves to Nagano, which is like kind of like a rural area, and he's trying to pass as a Japanese.
Yeah.
And he thinks that he can pretty much kind of cleanse this Korean part of him by like pretty much like by acting as a Japanese, by like marrying a Japanese wife and then like not telling anybody.
But there's also that irony there that the only job he can land
is
in
a
Nagano
pachinko.
is at a pachinko parlor, which is something he like
Abhors.
looked down on his brother for working at a pachinko parlor.
Yeah.
Right, so like to him, like he did everything right. He still ended up in the same place.
It is very tragic in a way that Noah is so desperate to assimilate. You know, like whereas like Musasu, like I feel like with Musasu, he's just like, yeah, I'm Korean, so what? Like,
Yeah,
it's nothing that I can change, but like I'm gonna do the best with my lot. Whereas like with Noah, it's just like in order to be a worthwhile person, I have to be Japanese. There's only one way.
yeah. I mean, no one wants to conform to what society expects of him, or what he thinks society expects of him. Whereas Mozasu, throughout his arc, makes the world conform to him. Right? He goes and he marries his his first wife, and then when she passes away, like years later, he starts dating a Japanese woman who, like, basically the whole world's telling him that's not okay, but he's just like, I'm just going to do it because, and I don't care if she can't marry me. I like this, and this is what I'm going to do.
There are two types of immigrants in the world. One is you adapt, like the immigrants who adapt, and the other, not so much. And, you kind of see that with Noah and Musasu.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't think Noah didn't adapt. Like, he was adapting, but he was adapting through like a different way. He was trying to adapt to expectations, whereas Musasu was like, whatever, you're going to think what you're going to think. I don't need to worry about what you think.
Yeah. I guess we should move on to the whole suicide part.
Yeah, so this is a part where this is where a lot of our Goodreads members wanted us to like touch on, because it's a huge part of the book, and suicide is not a motif, but is a topic that gets broached actually quite a bit in the book, even though it only happens twice in the actual story. Twice
in the actual story, but you see it in the peripheries.
Yeah,
like Noah's wife, her father killed himself by suicide because of like shame, because he killed his patients through malpractice, and then as soon as he killed himself, like her mom like had a mental breakdown, and now she's like, stuck in a wheelchair, and her mind's not the same. And therefore, those two things have made her your family undesired for marriage.
Your blood is now tainted with suicide and mental illness.
There's a lot of just like, because of what your parents did or what your parents have become, it has tainted you, and you are kind of like tied to this bad legacy. Yeah. And it has nothing to do with like whether or not like you've done good things in your life. It's just part of you.
Yeah. And another through line is a lot of just like, not ideation, but like thinking that like your loved ones, the world would be better off without you there. Right. Yosef goes through this, Uncle Yosef, who was Isaac's brother, after being badly burned and something that like I didn't realize when I read it was like, yeah, he got sent to Nagasaki.
Oh, as soon as I read that, I'm just like, oh, is he gonna die? Because that is not a good place to go.
Before 1945.
Surprisingly, he survived.
He survived the big one, but then the building, like a wall fell on him and he got badly burned. But he was thinking like, now that he can't provide for his family, they'd be better off without him. That's something he says. There's a scene where Mozasu, whose best friend turns out to be a detective, which is funny, talking about how they each thought about suicide when they were younger too. And like how sometimes it'd just be easier not to struggle. But at the end, the person who does commit suicide is Noah. After his mom finally finds him, after 11 years of like hiding.
Yeah.
And so Goodreads member Akalina asked, I still don't fully understand the reason behind Noah's suicide, though. I understand he struggled with his identity and his father's bad blood and way of making money, but since he had made a different life for himself, why would he commit suicide right after his mother's visit? The bit at the end where we find out that he was regularly visiting Isaac's grave while he had run away is even more confusing for me. What are your thoughts on
that? So there's this chapter before Noah meets his mother, and it's when his son asks about curses and how do you break a curse. And I think that was kind of when Noah had this idea that like it doesn't matter that like that he's living as this false like Japanese person. I mean, he is Japanese, but like, you know, like he has been hiding his Korean identity, and he thought that like by doing that, it's like setting his children free from this quote unquote bad blood. But, like when his mom shows up at his work, he's like, oh no, like my past is gonna like come back and bite me in the ass. And, he realizes that he'll never really be free from Kwon-soo, who has been monitoring him. Mm-hmm. And he knows that he, like his family will always be looking for him, always like will always kind of be in the background. He can't really escape his heritage and his family. So I think him killing himself in suicide was a way to break his children's ties to him, kind of like quote unquote ending the curse of being Korean, to make them like, I don't know how to explain it, but like that's kind of what I got from that chapter. And also it like if you think about it, like suicide is a very
Japanese.
It's a very Japanese and Korean. It's a weird cultural thing.
Yeah, I mean that's something that Jess, also a good reason member Jess asks is the motif of suicide. Do you think it was an intentional theme, or does it just reflect people's mindset in that setting, geographically and historically? I think culturally, it's always like you hear about like samurais killing themselves to like when their masters like fall. Or
same thing with women, like you know, as soon as their chastity is compromised, it's like the only way to be free from their sin is to kill themselves. And I think there is this like notion in the book that trying to articulate this in a way that would be understandable.
Well, I mean, Mozasu says later on, you know, after like years after the suicide, that like, yeah, his brother wanted to be so Japanese it killed him. Yeah. Right, when he was like talking to his friend.
I think there are people in this book with kind of like a fatalistic mindset, like their fate is kind of set in stone and there's nothing they can do to change it, and therefore life is kind of not worth living at that point. And then there are people in the book who kind of have a different mindset, or like, I don't care if this is the way it's always been.
Yeah.
Like, I need to survive because I have loved ones that I have to take care of. So there is a contrast in those two mindsets of like that the characters have. I honestly don't know if like it was like an intentional motif. I mean,
intentional or not, it's a natural part of surviving.
Yeah.
Right. Like the first part of survival is really deciding that survival is what like is the option. Like if you want to survive, death is out of the question. You do what you can to make sure you do what you can to make sure you live. Right?
I also think it's interesting that like I think all of the characters who killed themselves in suicide were men, not the women. And it kind of brings into question like what happens when a marginalized, like men in a marginalized group, when their masculinity is oppressed, right?
Yeah.
And it's like how far does it drive them to the edge?
I mean, now that I think about it, like Kim Chong-seo, who was like one of their friends and basically like one of their guardians during the wartime, and
he's the one who gives Sunja and Kyungi their first
Yeah.
job, pretty much.
And he essentially commits suicide by like foregoing like because he's in love with Kyungi, but he knows that Kyungi will never leave Yosep even though he's bedridden, and
even though Yosep said it was okay.
yeah. And there's a whole thing where like maybe he was in love with the idea of her, and like if she was the type of who would leave Yosep, then he wouldn't be in just this whole complicated love, whatever. But he decides to go back to North Korea, which is essentially a death sentence, right? For him.
Yep.
Instead of like dealing with this unrequited love.
I forgot the quote that Hanzu tells Chang-ho when Chang-ho mentions that he is thinking about going back home in the north, and like Hanzu's like, don't be stupid. Like in the north they will kill you. In the south they will starve you. Like there's like this is your best option, staying in Japan.
It was and it was interesting that like it seemed like sympathies for the north was more prevalent in Japan than sympathies for the south, because they're saying, well, was it like because the whole communist propaganda is about for the working people, whereas the south is like, I think there was a line saying that, oh yeah, it's being run by a dictator right now. Which was true. I mean, it was martial law, right?
Yeah, it was. Back then, Korea, like the southern part of Korea wasn't doing so well financially, and people were starving, and it was not a great time for South Korea compared to North Korea, where people were getting fed. But at the same time,
they had the support of China and the USSR.
Yeah.
And I mean, Ko Hansu was like, this is like his deal, right? He's very independent. He's like, I don't want, like, even going back now, like, instead of the Japanese, now it's the Russians and the Americans that you'll be serving. Like, you'll be under. And why do that when you can be freer here if you take care of yourself?
And Hanzu just, is kind of confused, being like, why are you so nationalistic? Like you've pretty much lived like most of your life in Japan. Like, what is your deal with like this nationalistic pride with a country that kind of didn't treat you all that well compared to Japan as well? So
and that seemed like such a Korean thing as well, because there's that interstitial poem or quote, I think in Act 2, saying that like Korea is everywhere, even if you leave Korea, where you are is Korea.
Yeah.
And like, what's that term? Han, right? Or the like the
Han. Okay, so
they don't mention that in the book, but that's kind of what that is, right?
Yeah, that is what that is. So yeah, like a big theme in this book, and we've mentioned it a couple times already, that the inheritance of trauma, the inheritance of shame, and having bad blood. If I could sum up what Han is, it's very difficult because there's no like English equivalence to it.
Yeah.
But it's pretty much like this, it's like a mix of bitterness, grief, anger, and just like this reluctant acceptance for all the bad things that have happened. And it is believed by a lot of Koreans that is passed on through generations, and it's like part of our DNA. And like we're told like Koreans, we can endure anything because we've endured like Japanese rule, we've endured the war, and it's just like we have this Han inside of us. So yeah, that is kind of a big deal in this book. Since we mentioned like Chang-ho going back to North Korea, I do want to touch upon this theme of how each generation relates to their quote unquote motherland.
Yeah.
Because like Mosasu and Noah have never been to Korea because they've kind of been in this limbo of.
They were born in Japan, raised in Japan.
Raised in Japan. They don't have Japanese citizenship. At least not anymore. Their quote unquote citizenship, because I don't think it's a real citizenship, but like their citizenship is tied to United Korea, and United Korea does not exist.
Yeah.
So it's like they have like this piece of paper that says like they're from a United Korea, but that doesn't exist, and therefore they are stateless. They can't get Japanese citizenship.
They can't get passports. They can't have visas. Like they essentially can't.
They can't leave.
They can't leave, even though they're not welcome.
And even if they do go back to Korea, like they will always be seen as like Japanese bastards. Like, it's like they're pretty much doomed either way.
Yeah, and at this point, there's been such like, and this is something that is personified in later on in Solomon's arc with Phoebe. It's like there's this hatred for Japan that foments in liberated Korea, like in the new Korea, like that, like makes it difficult for them to go back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Japan was supporting this campaign for Koreans to be repatriated in Korea, and a lot of it was like with North Korea, like, and it's just like this idea that like there's this like obsession with purity, you know? It's just like, oh, if you're not like, it's like, oh, if you only have like a little bit of foreign blood in you, you're not welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it, like there's like this obsession with it. And the funny thing is that most of the Koreans who were living in Japan at that time were from Busan. They were from the very most southern part of Korea, but you know, then they get repatriated in North Korea.
Yeah.
And most of them don't come back. And it's like.
And that's another theme that goes like just the Japanese cultural desire for purity and to like for not sticking out. And there's again, like we should probably head to Solomon's arc because we're going to touch on a lot of themes from there. But this idea that, like peacetime Japan is all about conformity.
Yeah.
And if you can't conform, I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you don't have 100% Japanese blood, even a little bit, you're like, you stick out and you're going to get ostracized.
I remember recently, Miss Japan was mixed race.
Yeah.
And she got a lot of flack for it. People were saying like, she's not like truly Japanese, even though she was like third generation. And yeah, like that discrimination and obsession with like purity is still there today.
Yeah.
And moving on to Solomon.
Solomon is Mosasu's son from his
first wife.
Did they ever marry Etsuko?
It wasn't clear.
Yeah.
I don't think they did. Solomon calls her his stepmom. So
yeah,
I'm guessing that they got married.
Okay. His mom was Yumi, who was a Korean who worked for his best friend's mom's tailoring business.
2 degrees of separation, you guys. Still works today.
Yeah. I mean, did you want to talk? I know you want to talk about how courtship worked.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we mentioned how like a woman's quality of life was determined by who they married, right? And also a lot of their marriage had to do with like how you looked. So yeah, women had very little power back then. And with Sunja, she really didn't have any choice but to marry Ishak because who would take her, and her children wouldn't have last names and they couldn't be registered and all of that.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like getting married was the only way to survive, especially since like women couldn't like own businesses without like special circumstances, obviously. And then like we moved on to like Mosasu and his wife works. Yeah. And he doesn't stop her from working like until she gets like really pregnant. But
it was also super cute when he was like, oh, you don't think I know English? And he busts out his English. He turns out to be like pretty good.
I don't remember that. But
yeah, like that's how he impresses her. Like, oh, you want to learn English? And then he goes,
oh, that's right.
I'm Moses Park.
Yeah, like the relationship that Mosasu has with his wife is very different from Kyungi and her husband Yoseb.
Well, even his brother and his wife, like Noah chose I forgot her name, Risa.
Risa, yeah,
because he felt she's the only person here that would be like this. She's already disgraced, so
yeah,
like
it seemed almost kind of like like a contract
Yeah.
for like between Noah and Rise, whereas like with Musasu and Yumi, Musasu continually had to like court her, being like, I'm worthwhile. Like, I know you want to go to America, but like, I'm worth staying for.
Because he's already like a Pachinko manager at that point.
Yeah.
Like he already had that cloud above him that he might not be on the up and up,
Yeah.
you know? And then later on, like his son Solomon and his girlfriend Phoebe, that's a much more modern relationship too, because like they end up breaking it off.
Yeah. I thought it was so funny that like Phoebe goes to meet Solomon's family. I mean, this isn't the first time, but like she goes and like Sunja and her mom, they're cooking Korean food and they ask Phoebe like, oh, do you cook Korean food?
Yeah.
And she says, I don't know how to cook. My mom doesn't know how to cook.
We had Korean food by going to restaurants.
Yeah. Like my mom like was a doctor. She she did homework at the table and like my aunt cooks food like only on special occasions, and she was like really proud of that, whereas like Sunja and her mom were just like, what,
like horrified, like
this is not okay,
my grandson will starve if she marries you. And yeah, so Solomon has a very different upbringing than the rest of the family, because he pretty much grew up because his father becomes a millionaire pachinko guy in Japan, and so he has like giant birthday parties with pop stars, and
he also comes from like an international school.
He went to English language, like basically an ISB or in IS school.
Yeah, right? Yeah, and like that was like a conscious choice from Musasu, because he said like, oh, if he goes to a Japanese school, then people will pick on him for being different, for being Korean. But if he goes to a school where everyone is different, then there will be a less chance of discrimination from that. So Solomon was essentially just kind of protected from all of that until he turned 14 years old, when he has to go register with the Japanese government.
Permanent resident card.
Permanent resident card. He has to get fingerprinted and he has to take an interview. And before then, I don't think he faced any kind of like serious discrimination from Japanese people, because he's also lived in a neighborhood where it's mostly like Korean Japanese.
Yeah, this one here is in Yokohama, which is in Tokyo.
And it's very international as well. There's like Americans, there's Chinese people. So he's kind of lived in this safe bubble.
I could relate to his experience because I remember going in, because I have a green card because I'm Canadian, and having to get fingerprinted and ask all these questions by this person just didn't like. I don't think they were mean. They're just like whatever. Like it's government job.
I don't know. They were mean. I mean, like with Kyungi, they were like, oh, like all Koreans say that, and then like Musas is like, she's not Korean, she's Japanese. Like, honestly, you guys can't tell us apart. So this is, I mean, the only reason why that you're like fingerprinting us is to like monitor our activities and to like bar us from getting apartments and like and all that stuff. And I totally get that too, because I didn't become a U.S. citizen until I was 20, and there was always this.
How's that jury duty going?
I have not gotten summoned for a jury duty. I don't know why they haven't summoned me yet. I'm kind of excited for it.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm like, I've been summoned twice, but since I'm not a citizen, I'm like, nope, sorry.
But like with my family, at least, we've kept we were permanent residents for a very long time, because my parents always thought that we would go back to Korea. And it's kind of the mindset that Sunja has for her sons and her grandkids. She's like, I want to go back one day. But the problem is the Korea in her mind no longer exists. And Korea has definitely modernized. And because she has lived in Japan for now most of her life, she would be turned away almost immediately. And it's just interesting because Solomon goes to school in New York.
How sad were you that he didn't go to NYU? He went to the other school on the Upper West Side.
I mean, he went for business, so I mean, I guess like NYU Stern is renowned for business, but still, it was just like it was really funny to me that he went to school in New York and still ended up with a Korean girl.
Yeah.
And she spoke better Korean than him. And I thought that was, I just thought that was like so funny.
I really liked Phoebe's character because in her, I saw like maybe half the Korean American girls that I know in the States. Just the way that they approached being Korean. And also, like, so I have a couple of friends who have this self-realized, like, irrational hatred for Japan based on what their parents told them, or based on, like, just, like, family, like, history. Because, like, if you think about it, like, Solomon's family is maybe, like, 3 generations removed from, like, from being in Korea. Like, they're culturally pretty Japanese. Whereas like Phoebe's family is only like maybe 1 generation removed from like a generation that actively hated Japan.
Yeah.
Right. So you see another way that like this
this prejudice is passed on
to generation, right?
It's really funny, like for me personally, because so I have this friend who is also Korean American. She was born and raised here. And her parents are from Busan. And I remember growing up together, like we were really into like Japanese products, right? Like Japanese pencils and anime and books and films. And her parents were so anti-Japanese. They were like, "What are you watching? That's not good." And they once watched a Korean drama where there was like a mixed race Korean Japanese actor. And as soon as they found out that he was part Japanese, they were like, turn that off. But with my family, it's been very like, like they don't, I mean, they do care. Like there's like very subtle like prejudices here and there, but overall it hasn't been like very harsh. And I just like, I find that really funny because like with my family, like I said, they come from a background where they're fighting for independence. And like, and like also I was born in Korea. So it's just like, oh, we don't hate the Japanese that much, but you, like, you were born and raised here. And, yeah, it's so, like, I just find it like funny that a lot of Korean Americans, they kind of have this passion for finding out like where their origins are and like learning more about their heritage and history. Whereas like Koreans in Korea, they don't care because they don't have to prove anything. They don't have to prove that they're Korean. They live there. They're dominant. So, I think definitely origins mean something else for people who are immigrants and people who are in marginalized groups. And you see it in Solomon. He really has a different mindset compared to his grandparents and to his dad.
This is the last segment of the story, and there's still a lot of themes that we haven't touched on. And this podcast is running a little long.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, so Solomon's arc has kind of 2 or 3 main through lines, or 2, let's say 2. It's his relationship with his stepsister, and his relationship with like his identity. And that has to do with like his job and his girlfriend. Right. So let's talk about the stepsister. So Hannah is Etsuko, which is his stepmom's daughter, who is kind of a mess. And she is probably our first example of, or probably second example after Risa of this idea of like tainted blood, tainted legacy.
Yeah.
Right. Because her mother is basically a divorced adulterer.
Yeah.
Right. And because of that, like her children and her daughter kind of have cut ties with her. Her sons have cut ties with her, and her daughter kind of has no, like, similar to Noah, kind of assumes that her life is going to be a certain way from now on without any, like, with no hope. Right. And there's this really good quote that is in this section where Etsuko kind of compares life with Pachinko. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying, there could only be a few winners and a lot of losers, yet we played on because we had hope that we might be the lucky ones. How could you get angry at the ones who wanted to be in the game? Etsuko had failed in this important way. She had not taught her children to hope, to believe in the perhaps absurd possibility that they might win. Pachinko was a foolish game, but life was not.
Yeah, pretty much sums up
Yeah.
sums up the entire experience of the 4 generations of this family.
And kind of like the key difference between Moses and his brother too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what did you think about this, like the relationship between Hannah and Solomon? Because it was kind of also like kind of icky in a way, right?
It was gross. Like, not gonna lie, it was really gross. Hannah was a mess, and I didn't like any of her dialogues really, because I was just like, why is she talking like that? It sounds like she.
Well, she's of that generation, and we see this also with Hansu's new mistress, kind of like girls who just sell their bodies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a woman's chastity isn't like a top priority anymore. But like with her, I was just like, why are you doing this to yourself? Like, you're so self-destructive. And like Solomon constantly tells her, like, you're smart. You can start over. You can do this. But she's like, I'm set to
She's like
be miserable for the
Jenny
rest of my life.
from Forrest Gump, right? Kind of.
I think though, like, it was kind of like the final example of a woman's lot is to suffer.
It's just another through line.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, like that still exists today. that idea that like in order for a woman to do well in life, you have to suffer a lot.
And like her downfall occurs at the same time that Solomon is moving up, right? He graduates from Columbia. And gets a job at a big investment bank, which is like the dream, right? He's going to make it in corporate Japan finally after 4 generations of suffering. And we're finally at this point where we have an educated member of the family in a respectable business. And then he basically learns that, yeah, it's more of the same bullshit here too, right? Like instead of culture holding them down, now it's capitalism. Now it's instead of being seen as an undesirable like people, now he's being seen as like a tool to be used to make money. And if he's not useful, and then he's going to be thrown away. Yeah. Or like, so he gets brought in on this big deal to get like a piece of land to sell, right? And then when that deal goes through, but there's like a little bit of basically the deal falls through because of who his father is.
Yeah.
Right. And then he gets fired from the job. And he kind of realizes at this point that like, same thing with his father, right? Kind of like,
I mean, it's kind of like his father was just like, you went to international school, you studied in New York, you graduated from Columbia, like your life should be set. Like you should be able to pass through all these hurdles of discrimination. And I think that's like the first moment where Musasu is just like, oh, like, nope, that still happened. And
I mean, he goes to dinner with his father and his friends, and then they all realize at the same time that like, yeah, the reason that he ended up being fired, and the reason why the deal that they helped him with didn't go through was because of who his family was.
Yeah.
That they were Korean, that they ran Pachinko parlors.
Yeah.
And so Solomon at the end decides, you know what, I'm just going to take up the family business because he wants to stay in Japan. And I guess he feels like, with Solomon, you feel like he holds no, like he doesn't have, like even though the trauma, like the hereditary trauma still affects him, he holds no like guilt over it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, like, I really liked the but like, I really liked the character of Phoebe because she was like asking him questions that he wasn't asking himself.
Yeah.
She's just like, why is Japan still like considering like Korean Japanese who have been here for 3-4 generations as foreigners? Why do you not have a Japanese passport? Why do you have a Korean passport? Like, why haven't you applied for citizenship? And it's just like a lot of Korean Japanese, they still have Korean passports. They haven't like for a lot of people, they haven't chosen one over the other. It's just kind of like,
yeah.
And it's like really interesting because like in in Japanese society, it's like such a collective mindset, right? And it's like why haven't you just tossed your Korean passport? Like, you're pretty much Japanese. Like, you speak Japanese more than Korean. Like,
and then at the end, Phoebe becomes like this final like inflection point of his identity, right? Because she represents his escape valve. He can go back with her to America and probably be okay, but he wants to stay in Japan. He decides he wants to be like, he is Japanese. He is Korean Japanese. Like, this is his home. He wants to be here. And did you expect them to break up?
Yeah, I totally expected him to break up with her, because I mean, he said it best, where like in America, Phoebe's like independence and like outgoing personality, and her being like very social justice like warrior, like that was like attractive in America, but in a Japanese setting where like people are trying to be like not stand out as much, like he was just like, oh, it's kind of brash and like unfit for the environment that he's in.
Well, I also found interesting that like she was unable to adapt in Japan as well, and you kind of see that these are two different examples of the same diaspora, and they've both adapted to where they ended up, right? Phoebe is definitely a Korean American girl.
She's like second generation. No, not second generation. I think her parents left like soon after the end of the Korean War.
I think she's probably second generation.
Yeah, I think she's second generation.
Yeah, if you think about immigration patterns, her parents probably came in the 70s, part of the skilled immigrant programs that they were doing.
Yeah,
and
it's funny because she never had to adapt her entire life, because she was born and raised in America, right?
Yeah.
So she was born and raised in a language that she could speak, and she was born in a place where there is diversity and oftentimes is considered a strength.
But she also went to Columbia in the 80s.
That is true.
Yeah,
that is true.
York, yeah.
However,
she
like,
had to deal with a lot of the same things we deal with.
Yeah.
Still here, right?
But with Solomon, he went to school abroad and he had to adapt no matter what.
Yeah.
So there's a difference right there. You know, it's just like they come to Japan and she can't adapt, and he's just like, well, I adapted. Why can't you? And yeah, it is very interesting that they are different. Like, they are part of a diaspora, but like very,
but also
very different.
That they have this, like, the way they broke up is very kind of adult.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of fighting, just realizing that this isn't going to work out. And that in itself is a freedom that they have as like young people in the 80s that their parents and their grandparents didn't have.
Yeah.
Right? Because back then, like, courtship was survival. Let's start wrapping it up. Like, I feel like we talked a lot about a lot of things, and this story is like, it's a lot of things. I feel like we can go for on another hour or two, and if we bring in more people to talk about it, could go on for longer than that. But definitely, I would recommend this book to everybody. It should be read.
I don't know if this book has been translated into Korean or Japanese, but I sincerely hope that it does find its way to Japan and Korea, because this topic about Japanese Koreans, they're Korean Japanese, it is never ever talked about. It's never written about. I can name maybe like 3 Korean Japanese celebrities, and like their background is usually never talked about.
Yeah, I actually read an article, an interview she did, that it actually isn't being pushed in Korea. Like, there's like actually like resistance to it.
There's
Korea.
A lot of resistance to it. And like, to be fair, like I think a bit of that anger is justified, because in a lot of Japanese school textbooks, they don't talk about the annexation of Korea. They don't talk about that colonial period. And that is
something that we didn't even touch on is the allusions to comfort women in the story.
Yeah, it's mentioned briefly in the book, but there's that. And also, I found out that the whole permanent residency thing in Japan, where you get fingerprinted, that didn't end until 1993.
Really?
I was alive during that time. Like, that is insane.
Wow.
I'm sorry if like this discussion has kind of like been us like running around in circles.
This
But
book
I
has
want
a
to
lot.
say,
Yeah.
it's a really difficult book to talk about because, like, I don't know, I just felt like I read a saga.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
how do you sum up a saga?
what this book does really well is it keeps reminding you of people you might have forgotten about. Like at the end of the book, they still bring up Huni, like the original patriarch of the family. They still bring up Isaac and Joseph, and like people who have died is still very much part of the story, even after they die.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Youngjin, the great grandmother, brings up Changho as she's dying with Kyunghee, and it's like, dude, the guy like left for North Korea like 200 pages ago.
She's also saying like, oh, like you're a bad daughter. And
Yeah, she got really mean at the end.
she's like, I suffered so much for you to be happy. And like, you haven't paid me back for all the things that I've done for you.
Yeah.
And, you know, like motherhood is a very crucial part of this story. Just like a mother's sacrifice in order to like make sure their kids have a future.
Yeah.
And, you know, like when I was reading this book, obviously like it hit me very like personally. 'Cause it's like if I look back at my family, it's just like, okay, like generation 1, like colonial period. Okay. And then like generation 2, like right after the Korean War. And then
Yeah.
like, it's like my generation, we're in America now.
Yeah.
And my parents, like growing up, like my parents sent me to Korean school, and the one that I went to for like most of my formative years was like an all-day school. Like it was like from 8:30 in the morning to like 5 p.m.
Really?
Yeah, and they like drilled in like a lot of history, and like my parents' like justification for that was just like your ancestors didn't fight and die for you to forget your language and where you come from, and like it's important. And it's like, you know, like growing up hearing all that stuff is just like, I'm American.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. You know, now that I'm like an adult, it's like, no, it does matter. Like it does matter. It definitely does its part in you finding your identity. And that was a major part of this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I come from a very biased position.
Well, the book was Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee, part of a unofficial trilogy of books about the Korean diaspora that she's writing. She's currently writing her third novel, which is about Korean cram schools.
Yeah.
That's going to come out
About
soon.
the toxic culture of pressuring your kids in education.
And her first book was Millionaire.
Free Food for Millionaires,
Yeah, which
and that
is
was a Korean American
Yeah.
story.
So if you like this book, definitely check out Free Food for Millionaires, and I guess wait for that third book. And on that note, that's also going to do it for this episode of Books and Boba. Again, if you have any comments about what we discussed, if you want to add on to the discussion.
Please add on to the discussion, because obviously we did not touch everything in this book.
Yeah, you can do so on our Goodreads forums. Just go to goodreads.com and search Books and Boba and join. Don't forget to introduce yourself in the introductions thread. We always love to meet new members.
And our February pick is Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too by Jamni Sun.
Yeah, and that's spelled alien, ALIEBN,
BN.
For your reference. And it's an illustrated story about an lonely alien sent to our world. And I'm very excited to read something a little bit lighter after this family drama. Someone should make this into like a miniseries. I think I would watch that.
I'm sure deals are being made.
Thanks again for listening. Thank you, Rira, for joining us on this adventure.
Finally succumbing to...
You've been putting this off for long
I know.
enough.
I've been procrastinating. I literally finished this book last night.
That's why there's so many thoughts. But thanks for joining us for this episode of Books and Boba. I hope you liked our discussion of Pachinko. And we'll see y'all next time.
Bye.
Bye. This episode of Books and Boba was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited by Marvin Yue. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from our Asian American community. If you like books and boba, you might also want to check out the Collabcast, a weekly podcast about pop culture and the creative life from an Asian American perspective, and the official podcast of the collaboration movement. You can find the Collabcast and all the other great shows of the collective by going to the website www.podcastpotluck.com.